As you know, or if most of you know that's been here on a regular basis, that this year our theme is to do with our life in Him, our life in Jesus Christ. Last year's theme was His life, the life of Jesus Christ. And so we talked every week about the life of Jesus Christ in a variety of different ways and circumstances. And I'm sure we gained a great deal from looking at those things that has to do with the life of Jesus. It's strange in that He only had 3 years on this earth that's really recorded for us. I mean, 30-some years He lived, but 3 years has been recorded, and yet there is Jesus Christ is found in almost every book of the Bible and many chapters as well. So, as a follow-up to that, we felt that it would be good for us to be able to apply those lessons that we learned about Jesus Christ and His life itself, and to look at our life in Him as well. And so we've been looking at the life of the church, and we've been looking at the life of the family. That's where we began the first few lessons. And now we're up to, I'll let you guess what it is. A man was driving his 6-year-old daughter to school. And as he come up to the stop sign, he kind of drifted through and wasn't nothing coming. And so he, rather than to go to all the trouble of stepping on the brake a little harder and stopping, he just, drifted through the stop sign and kept on going. Didn't interfere with anything. It's what I understand is called a California stop, where you just kind of roll and drift through the stop sign. A police cruiser happened to be lying in wait and saw him do this very thing, and so he comes up, and he didn't get more than a block or so before the lights come on, and he got pulled over. As he's sitting there on the side of the road in California in the summertime, he pulled over and rolled the windows down and turned the car off because he wasn't going to be able to have any air conditioning, and it was going to be rather uncomfortable in there. And so all the windows were down on it, and the police officer walked up, and as he walked up, he happened to see his daughter, this little man's daughter, sitting in the back seat. And he said to the daughter that was there in the back seat, are you on your way to school to be dropped off? And the daughter, said, yes, I'm on my way to school to be dropped off. Kind of surprised that the police officer was talking to her, since obviously it wasn't her that he came there to talk to. And he says, this is not the first time. She said, this is not the first time. You see, my daddy gets pulled over just last week for the same thing. You see, Daddy's not very good at stopping. Oh, is that right? The police officer says. Yes, he doesn't ever stop a stop sign. Him and Mommy have discussions about this from time to time. He says, well, do you do anything about it? She said, well, I tell him to stop. And so the officer instructed her to continue with her diligence about his habit of running through stop signs, and her dad to continue suggesting to her dad that he begin to stop at them stop signs. And he gave the man a ticket, or gave the man a warning ticket, and then drove off. Today we're going to talk about parenting. Everybody's favorite subject. Everybody loves to be talked about parenting. It must be their favorite subject because libraries are full of books about parenting. There are hundreds of volumes of books of how to parent someone, how to parent children, what children need, what children don't need. I'm glad we have children here with us today, and we're going to talk about parenting. But before we do, it's important for us to realize that each child is their own individual. All children aren't the same. I grew up in a house of 3 brothers. I had 3 brothers and 4 boys in the house. And none of us are the same. None of us are the same. One of the sister-in-laws later in life told Tina that she got the good one. I'm not sure good at what, but she got the good one. I've been telling her that for 50 years and doesn't seem to do any good, but doesn't give me any brownie points anyway. Each child is an individual, and each child is different. No matter what you say that this is the way, this is the right thing, or this is a good thing to do with a child, each child is different. And the approach is going to be different no matter what you do. They have different needs and different wants. Different things motivate them. Different things motivate them. I've seen some children that discipline didn't faze them at all. I've seen other children that all it took was a look of crossness from mama or daddy, and they just break down in tears. You know, everything all the way across the gambit. There's some things that we ought to remember about children. And for this particular message, some of the main headings I've taken from a lesson presented by a coach, a youth minister as well, a father, and indeed a grandfather. So there's volumes of years of experience in raising children, and having grandchildren as well. The first thing that we need to remember about children is that children crave discipline. Children need to know their boundaries. Children want to know their boundaries. They may not know they want to know them, but they do want to know their boundaries. In Deuteronomy 6 and verses 6 and 7, and these are the words which I command to you today. They shall be in your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk to them when you sit in the house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You see, God the Maker understands that all of us, children or adults or anyone in between, crave boundaries, crave discipline. We want to know how things work. How do you get along? How do you do these things? And so when things change drastically, everybody gets afraid because they no longer know what the boundaries are. We understand that this year because things changed drastically in January, and so everybody's wondering what are the boundaries? What are the disciplines? What's taking place? Well, children are that way as well. God's testimony must be taught to our children because God's testimony is the boundaries that never change. They're the boundaries that never change. The Word of God is that which always has expected children to respect their parents, that has always expected fathers not to provoke their children, that have always expected mothers to love and nurture their children. God's Word is the Word from the beginning of time to the end of time that has always expected and has always taught the same things. It's difficult. It's a difficult task to raise children. I'm amazed, to be quite honest with you, that God put into being the ability for children to be born into households and to be raised and to be nurtured. I'm amazed at the many things that could happen, many of which do happen to children, and they still are able to grow up and become adults and productive adults at that. I'm amazed at the fact that God decided that it was infinitely important that young people have children. And I'm especially appreciative of that fact now that I'm 70 years old. I would hate to start over with we are, aren't we? We are started over with 2 children. We have twins back there. Those of you who don't know, my wife talked me into taking 2 dachshund puppies. And they are just as bad or worse than children, I think. But at any rate, it takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of prudence, a lot of judgment, and it takes a lot of parenting skills, things of which that grow up, that one grows into. I don't know how many of you have brothers and sisters or grew up among brothers or sisters. When my brothers and I all get together, we recall certain things about my mother and father. They've passed away now. But we talk about different things in the way that daddy and mother would handle certain things. And by the time, we got down to the youngest, daddy had mellowed quite a bit. Excuse me, he had mellowed quite a bit. And as they come, we begin to think, well, Rodney had it better than anybody else because he was the youngest. We need to develop the kind of relationship with children that can weather conflicts. You know why? Because there's going to be conflicts. People growing up, children, adults, there's conflicts. And we need to develop a relationship with our children where we can do that. Deuteronomy chapter 6, excuse me just a minute. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 6 through 7 talks about that. Walk with your children, go with your children, do things with your children. And while you're doing that, teach them the way of the Lord. Teach them the ways that are good, that are right, that are needful in their lives. We need to make deposits. We need to deposit goodwill and good emotional content into the bank accounts of our children. Because from time to time, we're going to need to make withdrawals. There's going to need to be some tough love that come about. Thank you, Bill. There's going to need to be some tough love that has to come about. The older children get, the more the requirement for tough love. Proverbs 29 and verse 17 says, correct your son and he will give you rest. Yes, he will give you delight to your soul. There's going to be disagreements. They're going to happen. And being young children and young parents, children are going to have different interactions to the discipline that they're being given, to the guidance that's being offered. They're going to look at things. If I've heard my father say it once, she said it 100. If I've told you one time, I've told you 1,000 times. And he's probably not far off. He probably wasn't far off. They need to learn, children need to learn to trust adults. When I talk about raising children, those of you who children are grown and gone or don't have any children or whatever, we need to apply these to the children we come in contact with, the children that are here. Children need to trust adults. I know there are some adults I wouldn't trust any child with. But by and large, most adults are relatively trustworthy, and they need to learn to be able to trust adults. They need to be able to trust the bus driver. They need to be able to trust the police officer. They need to be able to trust the doctor, the nurse. They need to be able to trust the teacher. All these, and of course parents as well. They need to be able to trust aunts and uncles, elders, and teachers, and preachers. So when we are talking with our children, enforce the fact that they need to trust in adults. They need to trust in mothers and fathers as well. We live in a society where half of us are divorced at one time or another, in some point or another. That doesn't make for a very good relationship for children within the parental family. Mothers and fathers need to teach their children they can trust their fathers. They can trust their mothers. They need to speak to one another lovingly and kindly, even though they have no longer married, and especially if they are married. Children need to know that relationship is there and solid. Children need to trust Christians. The worst thing in the world we can do to a child is to speak disparagingly about brothers and sisters in the Lord, about preachers, teachers, elders, Christians in general. I have over the many years that we've been preaching, had parents from time to time come in. I don't know why Johnny or Susie doesn't want to come to church. But you know what? 9 times out of 10, the preacher knows why. He knows why. Because the things that have been discussed were not things that encouraged trust in them. Now we come to the favorite passage of most people, Proverbs 13 and verse 24. He who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly. Let's do a little history lesson here. In the culture of the Israelites, they were mainly shepherds, not exclusively, but mainly people who took care of livestock. And as a result, they would have with them a staff. We're familiar with the staff, a long, tall pole, usually longer, taller than with a crook on the end of it, and that type of thing. And that staff sometimes was accompanied by a rod as well, just a stick, like a cane or something of that sort. That rod was a natural symbol of authority. When the sheep or the goats or whatever the animal was that was being herded saw that rod, it went the other way. It knew that wasn't the way to go. That rod was used to guide the sheep to greener pastures. That rod was used to guide the sheep to water. That rod was used to keep them out of danger and to help them to see the flock and to remain with the flock. It was a tool that was used by the shepherd to correct and to guide the flock. You're familiar with that passage. You're familiar with the passage that has that in it. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. The staff was to protect and pull them from problems. The rod was to guide them in the way in which they should go. Just as the Deuteronomy was talking about how we should walk with our children. When sheep stray from the path, the good shepherd would use the rod to steer the sheep away from these problems and these dangers. And the good shepherd seldom, if ever, had to use the rod in a menacing fashion to beat the sheep. In fact, they would rather not do that, because a good shepherd gently and firmly guides them in the right direction. You know, if a person hated a child, the very worst thing they could do was to withhold discipline from them. The book of Hebrews tells us that, doesn't it? The book of Hebrews says that him who God loves, he disciplines. Children need to have discipline. They need to have boundaries. They need to feel loved, and they need to be able to trust parents and adults as they go on. Do not withhold correction from a child, for if you beat him with a rod, he will not die. You shall beat him with a rod and deliver his soul from hell. Our problem with this idea of the rod and beating and that type of thing is that one little 4-letter word, beat. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, 4-letter word, beat. But we're familiar, and we use that word from time to time, never meaning what we used it to mean when we talks about the rod. David helps coach teams from time to time. Did you ever beat another team? Did you ever beat another team? When you play basketball, did you ever beat them? Did your team ever beat the other team?
Yes.
Yeah, do it all the time, don't they? Football players, well, we beat them last night. Wasn't no fights, wasn't no beating up. They won. They showed them who was the better person at the time, the better team at the time. That's what this rod is about. Showing children the right way, the good way, the boundaries that they need. Proverbs chapter 1 and verses 8 and 9. My son, hear the instruction of your father. Do not forsake the law of your mother, for they will be a graceful ornament on your head and chains of gold about your neck. Children seek praise. Children want to be praised, need to be praised. They need to be told they're handsome or beautiful. They need to be told that they're strong. They need to be told that they can do things. They need to be told all the things they can do. You see, children are well acquainted with the things they can't do. They know what they are. They know in themselves, well, I couldn't do that. You know? They try and try and try, and they fail and fail and fail. But the more they try and the more they fail, the more they come to the point where they can do something, and they need to be told they can do things. A study was made, 5 or 10 years ago, of girls in mathematics, women in mathematics. Women who had a job that had to do with mathematics, whether it be accounting or astronomy or whatever it was that they had, navigation, whatever their job was, if it had anything to do with mathematics, this survey was done. And what they found out was that their parents told them that they were good at math. They were good at it. I mean, you ought to know that. If you can figure out what the difference is between a half and a quarter of a cup, you've got to be pretty good at math. Simply enforcing with our children that they're good at things goes a long way towards encouraging them and encourage them every chance that we get. Children need to feel important. And you know what the Bible tells us? Children are important. Help them to realize that the true importance in their life is to walk in the way of the Lord. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he'll not depart from it. I know we want to have a lot of arguments about that, and I have a lot of problems with that as well. But it's true. Children need to be encouraged in the right way of the Lord. And if they are encouraged in that way, children will understand the duties that they have, the dangers that are associated with their life, and the blessings of the path that they're on, or the drawbacks to that path. Children need directions on how to perform these duties, how to avoid the dangers or how to deal with dangers. They need to understand that they are thought of by mother and father and everyone as a blessing, not as a curse. And certainly not as the surprise. Fix on their minds this indelible understanding that God has for them. I don't think it's any accident that the Savior singles out children as the example of a good Christian person. I don't think it's any accident. I don't think he was striving, and looking for something. I think he had that thought out already. He knew what children were. The coach that I was looking at says, we need to teach our children that not everyone can play quarterback. The house that we grew up in Belpre, Ohio, my dad had 9 acres of ground. Most of it was up, but there was a big wide meadow in the bottom of it, and all the kids in the neighborhood would come to our house to play football, to play baseball, to play whatever we was playing. And one of the things that we had to realize is that not everybody could play quarterback. Behold, children are a heritage for the Lord. The very fruit of their womb is a reward. Children's children are the crown of old men. The glory of children is their father. Coaches often tell their players that there's basically 3 types of players. I want to write this down. 3 types of players. There are impact players, there are role players, and there are practice players. You ever hear that? There are impact players. They're normally people on the line because their thinking is, just get me something, give me something to hit. I want to hit something. I want to block something. I want to run into something. That's an impact player. A role player is someone who has a position perhaps in the backfield or on the line or on the end of the line or something, and they have certain things that they have to remember and patterns they have to run after. Then you have the practice player. He's the one that practices and practices and practices and practices. Because he may not be as physically able as someone else. But with practice, he can learn how to do what needs to be done. They need to realize the importance of all the roles that are there. At that time, when the disciples came to Jesus saying, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" Jesus called a little child to him, set him in the very midst of them. He said, "Surely I say unto you that unless you become converted and become as a little child, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven." Becoming as a child doesn't mean to be acting in a mean or nasty manner. He's talking about becoming like a child in a trusting and understanding manner. Children want a model to mimic, someone to pattern their lives after. So we need, as adults, parents and adults, we need to live our lives in such a fashion where people can follow in our footsteps. You see, they're destined to become like what they most see. Our children are going to become like what they most see. And if what they most see is a parent coming home at 7 or 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and they're at home by themselves all day long, and they never see their parents but for an hour or so, they're going to become what they most see. It's been said that players watch how a coach handles problems, handles defeats, handles things. How do they speak to the referees? How do they handle the questions from parents or press or whatever? How do they say, what do they say about their opponents when they win or when they lose? Children will take on personally just about everything that parents have to say. Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 11, verse 1, "Imitate me just as I imitate Christ." Don't imitate my bad habits. Don't imitate the problems that I have, but imitate the things as I imitate Christ. Christ is the one that is our model. We need to live our life in such a way that children can model themselves after us. Children need to be taught how to fight their own battles. Perhaps one of them, there are several, but perhaps one of the biggest disservices that we've done to our school systems and the teachers and things of that sort was parents decide that they're going to have to fight for their child in one way or another. We need to teach them what to fight for. Children don't often know what's really worth fighting for. Sometimes they're taught to fight for popularity or for money or for a position or for respect or for any number of other things. But they need to be taught that they can learn many lessons. Not only by listening to what the Lord tells them to do, but by being able to work through the pain and the difficulty that comes about. We often learn more from the pain that we suffer. I think of Joshua chapter 24. Joshua was at the end of his life, after having spent many years on the road from Egypt over to the Promised Land, and then trying to conquer the Promised Land, and then going into battle with a variety of stronger enemies than he had, and relying upon the Lord to defend. He says, if it seems to you to serve the Lord, choose for yourself this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your fathers who you served that were on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Children want to learn. They want to learn. They always are. Their favorite question is why. Why do we do that? Why do we do that? Why is it? Why does it have to? Well, how come? Many universities oftentimes try to fill that gap and have failed most miserably. Some take the time to teach how Jesus taught, the procedure, the way that Jesus taught people. We need to become master teachers. Children always look for understanding and asking questions, and we need to be looking for that teachable moment. That teachable moment. That time when they ask that question, who was Jesus? When they ask that question, why are they being baptized? Why are they going down that water tank? Why are we going across town and knocking on strangers' doors and we don't know who they are? Why are we doing these things? That teachable moment to break to them and understand the Word of God. Don't miss the opportunity to teach a lesson. Don't miss the opportunity to teach a child. Your child, my child, anybody's child. Never miss that opportunity. That's why I am so impressed with parents who allow others to teach their children. Not just in teachers, not just in school, but teach their children. Be careful, honey. Don't run there. You're going to hurt yourself. Be careful. Watch what you're doing. Look out for these things. Be careful. Or the one that we're most popular here in this congregation. Where's your shoes? We need to look for those teachable moments. Children need someone who won't give up on them. Luke 15, verses 11 through 32. The parable of the prodigal son. We can debate numerous things about that prodigal son, but the one thing that stands out in that whole passage, the one thing, the father never stopped looking. And God never stops looking for us to return. Can you trust God? Can you come to the Lord and obey His word? As we stand and sing, we invite you to come.